Hello and welcome back to Black Hole Battles game development here on Let's Code Physics. You can probably tell, compared with last week, that some things have changed here in our game. For one, minor change for you, but major change for me. I've adjusted my panel layout here in Unity. This was inspired by a tutorial that I watched, and it's been working out well for me. So both the visual displays are over here, and then all the sort of object manipulation stuff is over here. So I'm not having to switch back and forth so much. The only thing I'll need to switch back and forth for is the print console, which hopefully I'll be needing less of going forward now that we've made our other major change, which is our game controls here. So a few weeks ago I made the announcement that I've decided to switch Black Hole Battles from a real-time action game to a turn-based, more strategic game. The way it ends up working is instead of using the keyboard to navigate the player ship, from one moment to the next, everything remains stationary. So if you look here in the game view, the player ship is not getting moved toward a black hole. The enemy ship is not maneuvering yet. What you're going to do now as the player is you're going to use this control panel, and this will become prettier and get better labels and things like that in a future update. Basically, I was worried about the controls right now. This top slider is going to adjust the rotation of the player ship. So keeping it in the middle is going to result in no rotation. Moving it to the left makes it rotate counterclockwise, and moving it to the right is going to make it rotate clockwise. And then the bottom slider is going to adjust the thrust. So pushing to the right is going to be a forward thrust, and moving it to the left is going to be a backward thrust. Lastly, the drop-down menu here is going to control whether the ship fires a shot. And this is actually a nice solution to the question of the ship having multiple types of weapons, because let's say you had 3 different types of weapons equipped on your player ship. You could select those different options here. So right now we've just got a single shot. Right now there's no penalty for firing, but eventually what I'd like to add is some sort of power management system where you have to manage the ship's energy reserves and either gain more energy or lose energy based on how much activity you're doing here. For right now, my pointer indicates that the enemy ship is over here somewhere. In fact, I can see its thrusters right there. Really, I know it's right here if I take the scene view and cheat a little bit as the game maker. So I know I need to rotate counterclockwise a little bit. Each little notch on this is about 15 degrees. And then I need to thrust forward, and then I'll fire the shot. And here's the deal. The enemy ship is doing the same thing. So the computer is deciding what the enemy ship is going to do. And then we're going to both move at once I press the go button. Watch this. So we rotate, we thrust, and then we fire. And he's trying to head this way. So again, I think I'm heading in the right direction this time. So I'm just going to up my thrust and fire again. And I was not headed in the correct direction. I need to rotate a little bit more counterclockwise. I definitely need to thrust. Maybe I can knock this guy into the black hole here. Oh, I just barely missed him. So this is the new feel of the game, and I'll be adjusting, things like the parameters and everything. Oh gosh, I really want to see if I can get one more, if I can knock him into that black hole. So now, he went the other way. So now it feels a little bit more like a game of billiards in a sense, where I'm trying to knock the enemy ship into the black hole, in this turn-by-turn system. So maybe if Black Hole Battles is too dramatic of a title, we could call this Space Pool or something. So what I want to do today is I want to walk you through the changes that I've made to implement this new turn-based system. I want to start out by showing you the thing that was hogging all of the computer time. So I said that the game was becoming much too slow to run in real time. Let me show you the culprit. Here's our enemy ship controls, CT. We've been looking at this the last few weeks. So this code has not changed very much, except that now all that code we've been working on is no longer in the update routine. So it's now under this select action routine. And we'll talk in a minute about where that gets called. So if I scroll down here, making the trajectories was fine. It's this cost calculation that was taking up a lot of the computer time. And in particular, it's this part where we look for black holes. Now, previously I was using Overlap Sphere, which is a 3D component. I needed to be using Overlap Circle, which is a 2D component, so I was not incurring the appropriate amount of cost, or computational cost, because I was using a 3D routine in a 2D game, and that was a mistake. I'm sure I've gotten lots of comments about that by now. So we've swapped that out for the 2D searcher here, and basically this is looking at the points along the trajectory. Currently it's looking at every 5th point. It's only looking at 5 points along the trajectory, but now that I don't have that lag problem, I can increase that to where it looks at every point or every other point. But it's going through the same process that it did before, and it's selecting, just like it did before, it's selecting here in Plan Exec, it's selecting what it should do for rotation, thrust, and fire. And currently there's no cost associated with firing, so it's just always going to fire. The enemy ship is always going to fire in our current demo mode. But really, that's the only major change I made to this code. So the trajectory generation is the same, the plan execution is the same. Again, the only difference is... where to go now? The only difference is that now, instead of all that taking place once per frame, it only takes place once per turn, whenever the select action is called. And that's where we get to this manageTurns.cs. So I've attached this script to an empty game object, a turn manager, and that just serves as the referee between the player and the enemy ship. So this is a pretty simple routine. It's got it does have a fixed update where it adjusts the go button and the rotation slider. So this is to reset the sliders every time so that you know they're starting back at 0. And then basically it's got three main subroutines. It's got a player action, it's got an enemy action, and it's got an update state. So basically what happens is that whenever the player, let's start with player action, whenever the player implements something in the sliders, it's going to activate this player action routine. So this player action subroutine has been attached to this go button here. So if I click on, is the go button visible here? Here it is. This go button, this control panel is in the canvas, which to me behaves strangely because it's tied to the screen, not to the game world. So if you look at this go button, whenever the button is clicked, it's going to activate manageTurns.playerAction. So when I go over here to manage turns, it's going to activate this player action, and it's going to pull off the rotation value. So how many increments of rotation does it want? It's going to pull off the thrust value. How many increments on the thrust slider does a player want? And it's going to pull off the fire value. Which option in the fire menu did the player select? And it's getting all of these from the slider values. It occurs to me these are both looking for sliders. How do I know that those are going? Oh yeah. That's right. Yeah. So basically, the way it's doing this is it's looking through every child in the in this game object. And so whenever it finds the rotation slider, this is how it's telling them apart. Sorry, I saw slider, and I thought, how is it telling the sliders apart? Which one is Quinn and which one is Wade? Basically, it's looking for the rotation slider here. Whichever one is the rotation slider, it's going to pull off that value. Whichever one is the thrust slider, it'll pull off that value. And then the weapon drop down, I mean, it's the only drop down there, but it's basically looking for that drop down menu. And there may be other drop down menus that we have, so this list may get added to. And then what it does is it keeps track of who has selected their action. So this player action selected and enemy action selected are basically there to keep track of, has the player made a decision and has the computer made a decision yet? And basically, if those are both true, so the player action selected is now true, the player has selected an action, then it checks for whether the enemy has selected an action. If they both have, then it calls update state. If they haven't, then it exits and just waits. because we also have this enemy action subroutine. And so what this does is it goes to the enemy control CT, this subroutine that we've been working with the last several weeks, and it activates the select action routine. So yeah, you can see that here it's got select action. So that's where it's activating basically that subroutine and saying, okay, computer, it's time to select an action. I've already done this, so I need to get rid of this little note here. And at that point, we extract the enemy selection. So again, the enemy is selecting a rotation increment, a thrust increment, and a firing increment. And it just pulls those off of that next step array that we worked with, I guess that was just last week, wasn't it? And then it's, and within this routine, it now selects the enemy action, what was it called? Enemy action selected, yeah. So within this subroutine, it sets enemy action selected equals true once it gets to the end, so it can take as long as it wants now, and there's no worry about lag, there's no worry about delays. It runs through this subroutine as long as it wants to. It's not tied to the frames. It says, yes, I've selected my action. And so then if the player has selected their action, then it calls update state. So basically, update state is going to get called from one of these two routines. It's either going to get called by the player action when the when the computer is done selecting an action, or it'll be called by the enemy action once the player has selected their action. I haven't checked yet, but I'm guessing that most of the time it's going to come from the player action because the player is going to take longer to adjust those sliders, and it's going to take the computer to run through a few trajectories. But we have that in both places just in case the computer takes longer to think than the human. Once we have both of those selected, we get to call the update state, and this is basically where the ships get moved. So we have this new routine, move ship, that now gets applied to both the player ship and the enemy ship. So no longer do we have enemy controls separate from player controls. They're now being, their motion is both being governed by the same routine. So they're being governed by the same rules, the same checks and everything. So let's head over to the ship mover. The ship mover routine is basically a stripped down version of what used to be the enemy controls or the player ship controls. First, we evaluate whether we are rotating. The way that works is back here in manage turns. Let's see. Oh, yeah, that's right. Let's see. So the first thing we do is we call move ship. So this is under the, oops, wrong thing. This is under the, this is under the fixed update. So it's not going to call that just yet. What we want to do is we want to make a routine called move ship. So this is where it initiates the process of moving the ship. So it reads in the values of I rotate, I thrust, and I fire. And again, this is either the player ship or the enemy ship, because now this routine is managing basically the animation at this point of both these ships. And so what we do here is we tell this routine that we are now ready to rotate. And what that does is it activates part of the fixed update routine, because here's the deal: you don't want to be animating this thing within the move ship routine, because that's not tied to the frame rate. If we do it there, it's just going to immediately rotate the ship, move the ship, and fire, and you don't get to see the animation. So in order to enact the animation, we're putting all this stuff in the fixed update routine, which by default is called once per frame. So normally when you're making your decision, all these booleans are false. You're not ready to rotate, you're not ready to move, and you're not ready to fire. So ordinarily in a frame, it just loops through an empty subroutine. It just skips all those things. Once we turn rotation on, once the ship is ready to rotate, then it goes through here, and it goes through and it applies the rotation. And this is exactly like the rotations we've had before. This is nothing new, it's just been relocated. Once we're done rotating, then we're ready to move the ship. So the ships are going to rotate, move, and then fire. So here, once we get to our last rotation frame, we set moving equal to true. And we turn rotation off. So this thing goes through its last loop, and the next time around, we're ready, or I guess once we exit this, then we're ready to start moving. So here we go through the same thing we've seen before. We have a force on ship vector. We're calculating the total gravitational force on the ship based on the information from the black holes. And then we add the thrust based on the thrust information we've been given. And it goes through all of that until we are done moving, until we've moved the set amount of basically time for one turn. And then once we get to that end of move time, we set moving equal to false and we set firing equal to true. So that deactivates this chunk of fixed update, and then it activates the firing part. Now the firing should only take one frame. Currently I'm assuming it takes one frame. There might be some sort of multi-shot thing that requires more than one frame, and we'll need to adjust that then. But basically once we enter the firing portion, if we've selected to fire, we activate the firing routine. Again, we've seen this before. This is normal instantiation of a shot. And then we set firing equal to false and done equal to true. And then we know that we are finished moving both of our ships. Once we've done that, so once we've completed both of those, we come out of here and we reset our values. And we say, okay, the player has not selected an action yet. The enemy ship needs to calculate its next action. So we set enemy action selected equal to false. We reset our control panel, which I guess we need to do... Actually, I guess that's what we do up here, isn't it, in this? So basically, once these are both done, we can reset the control panel and call for the enemy action. So that's actually not where I reset the control panel. Let me take out that errant comment. I suppose I don't really need these to be 0. Probably safer to leave them reset at 0 at that point, I think. It's already been passed over here, so that's not terribly important. But basically, here in this fixed update, so it's constantly checking for whether the player is done and the enemy ship is done with their moving. And once they are both done, so this is an and in between these two, once they are both done, then we reactivate the go button, reset these sliders, and tell the computer, okay, computer, go ahead and set another, or go ahead and select your next action. And so that is pretty much it. So we're not using this old ship controls anymore where we're asking for the keyboard input. So this piece is now defunct. It's been detached from the player ship. So I'm going to be, I won't be deleting it. I'll just be moving it to an archive file in case I need it later. But yeah, you've already seen that the thing works. Oh, we still have the game paused. That is also the nice thing, is that the game's default mode is to pause. So we've got it working in a turn-based system now. Uh-oh, what happened here? I must have changed a... I must have... what did I do there? I think I must have not saved something or other. Null reference, blah, blah, blah. It's clear. Probably didn't like me changing these in the middle of running the game. I had forgotten that I had started the game. But anyway, you can see how the logic works out in the gameplay here. We select a rotation, and we select a thrust, and right now we might as well keep firing. Pew. Oh, I almost got him. That was at the edge of my shot range. So I can see that he's probably heading up this way, so I'm going to rotate back this way a little bit, thrust forward and fire. And eventually I'm going to... adjust this control panel to give you like the number, like the degrees of the rotation and some measurement of the thrust, just so it's a little bit more quantitative. Notice our black holes continue to spin ominously while our ships wait for their commands. I think that's pretty cool. What you'll notice though is that the player ship and the enemy ship are not synchronized. So they're supposed to go rotate, move, and thrust. Watch what happens when I click go here. He didn't rotate as much as I did, so he was going while I was rotating. He was done moving before I was done moving, so he fired before I fired. What I'd like to have it do is have both of them rotate, and then wait, and then both of them thrust, and then wait, and then both of them fire. I think that'll just make for a better strategic options for the player. So that shouldn't be a problem. I just need to add some more conditions for them to proceed. But I like this a bit better. I think this will be a little bit friendlier on the brain. I think it'll help people think a little bit more physically about what they're doing as opposed to just frantically adjusting the controls. I've certainly enjoyed it more. Ooh, that was weird. I need to adjust what happens there when they collide with each other. So what we'll start working on next time is prettying up these controls. Getting the turns synchronized a little bit better. And also, now that there's a little bit better control, I think I can start making the levels harder. So I think I can start putting these black holes closer together. So if you look at these, if you're just trying to navigate around here turn by turn, that's going to be pretty easy. So I think I can move the black holes closer together to make it a little bit more challenging. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.